Hello, Liberty. We want to welcome you again to our third installment of our outreach class. My name is Ken McLemore,
And I'm Jonathan DeMonch,
and I serve as the missions pastor here at Liberty.
and I'm the local missions pastor here at the Hampton campus.
And we're so glad you could join us. You know, we appreciate you being here. And today we're going to talk about a good topic. But first, I just want to recap. You know, the first session that we did was on the resurrection. And that is a key point that I think every Christian needs to understand and know, because when you talk about witnessing, if you look in the book of Acts, they were witnesses to the resurrection. So they're saying, hey, we saw him, he died, we saw him again, and he rose from the dead. And so they were witnesses to a great historical event. And so that's the key of the resurrection. And without that, Christianity is not true. The second part, Jonathan, we talked about
Islam.
we did. We talked about Islam. And so, with all of these topics, we want you to understand that we are at the tip of the iceberg. And you know what? We are not scientists, we are not pro experts. We are just men who are interested, and we hope that you'll be interested too. And just to give you a recap also on our view of witnessing and talking to people about Jesus, you don't have to know everything, guys. The first thing is love. You need to love them. We're going to say that a lot today, aren't we? We're just going to talk about if we don't love them, if we don't show care for people, then our message is mute. And it's just a bunch of facts and arguing, and that's all. We don't want it to turn into that. But we want to be able to help equip you so that you can handle any situation
That's right.
that comes up. And you know what? It's okay to say, I don't know. Let me get back to you. That's okay.
Yeah.
And people don't get that.
That's why, just like Ken's saying, like stylistically, we are indeed doing this class differently.
Yeah.
It's conversational. We're only at the tip of the iceberg. We're kind of running through things just to kind of give you an idea so that you can then go and do some of your own research, and so that you can feel the freedom to have conversations in the same way.
Yeah, and you know, Jonathan and I were just talking about a guy. We're not going to mention his name. He's well known, and he's an apologist, I guess you would say, and he deals more with evolution versus creation, all that kind of stuff. But he's so bombastic that his message gets lost in his bombasm, if that's a word. And he's just so harsh that it just gets lost, doesn't
Right.
it? And
It's
people
like-
don't listen.
It's like everything he's saying is true, but it doesn't go over well because of the way he's communicating his message.
Yeah. And so today we're going to get into a topic. I'm just going to call it atheism or agnosticism. And you know, if you look at our culture, I don't think there's that many overall people, at least in America, and there's more and more all the time. I did not look up the numbers, but there's more and more all the time that would say, I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic. Some are very, how do I say, very precise on their wording. Like, for example, some would say nobody can be an atheist, and this is coming from people who don't believe in God. They would say because the word comes from atheist, which is the is a negation in the Hebrew, and the word theos means God, so it's not God, so it believes they don't believe in God. But most would say you can't prove or know if there's a God, and so they would call themselves agnostic.
That's right.
They could say there might be a God, but I don't know that. I don't necessarily believe that, and I can't prove it, and you can't disprove it,
Right.
and all that kind
And
of
I
stuff.
just don't believe in what's out there, what our society's been talking about for the past few thousand years.
Yeah, but I think, Jonathan, I would have to say that the prevailing cultural worldview, while some would say we have more Christians than we have anything, I think atheism really, with the no belief in a belief in no God, is really more prevalent than anything. What would you say in our culture? I mean, there is a Christian base. I believe that.
I feel like, honestly, Ken, I feel like whether it's atheists that seemingly know what they're talking about, or it's folks that just pick a worldview, I feel like a lot of people are angry at God.
Could
so
be.
they choose not to believe.
Yeah,
Like if
yeah.
I'm angry enough at my sister, she's no longer my sister anymore. She
Yeah.
ceases to exist. I
Yeah.
feel like that's how, ultimately, when you boil down to it, in many of my conversations anyway with atheists, that's ultimately what it is.
It is, and it's interesting you say that. We call them, well, I'll back up a little bit. You know, Ted Turner was one of those guys. If you read his story, his sister died when she was 9, or he was 9. I can't remember which one. But he was just mad at God, and so he claimed atheism. But you know what? I'm kind of pointing to an idea called practical atheism. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who say, oh, yeah, I believe God exists. but in their practice of their lives, they really don't act
Wow.
like he exists. And just yesterday, I read about a sports figure. He said, "I just want to give glory to God, and I really like this guy. I do." But I thought, dude, you just you were living a very immoral lifestyle, and he might have had repentance. Praise God. I hope he did. And it sounds like he did. But you can say, "I believe in God," but do this over here, and you're really living like God doesn't exist. And so I think that's the majority of people that I talk to a lot of times. It's just like, yeah, I believe in God, but I'm still going to go ahead and do this and this and this.
So Ken, you mean to tell me that I could say that I'm a Christian and I could believe in God, but still act like an atheist?
You can
Whew,
in your
man.
moral life. And here's the thing. Just because someone says they believe in God doesn't mean they do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so we're kind of coming at it from that viewpoint a lot of times. And so we want to talk a little bit about atheism. We want to give you a few little tools. But once again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a super Mr. PhD expert. I'm a guy who, in my own life, had a period of time, although I became a Christian when I was a young kid, I went through a time in high school when I would even say I was an agnostic atheist, kind of like a little communist guy. And really, Jonathan, it was probably more to make my parents mad and just to rebel than it was anything. But I will tell you, when I got to college, I met some good Christian friends that, 45 years later, they're guys that I talk to once or twice a week still. And boy, God paired me up with them. And this is when I began to delve into it. Does God really exist? Because I wanted to know for myself. So with all that said, let's kind of jump into it. And as you already know this, agnostic atheist really believes in several things. One is there's no higher being. There's no, they would say magical God is the way I've heard some of them phrase it. As far as how we came to be, we all know that they believe in evolution. They believe in the abiogenesis of life. In other words, life came out of nothing, and it came out of just dry, dead matter. And a third tenet that I would say of atheism is that the morals and the values are determined in several ways. They might be determined by society. They might be determined by the government. They might be determined by the tribe they run in. Because as you know, if you run in certain tribes, it's okay to do this and it's not okay to do this.
Yeah.
And it just depends on tribe to tribe. And you know what I mean by when I say tribe, I'm talking about your just peer group. The guys and gals you run around with, and that tribe may say, hey, this is okay to do, but this isn't. I mean, I've even heard of, the mafia. You used to see the movies where they would say, hey, it's okay to go out and do this, but you don't
Yeah.
touch kids.
Yeah.
You don't kill kids. You don't mess with kids. And that was kind of their philosophy within their tribe, you
Yeah,
know.
even the mob has their own basis of
Yeah,
morality.
they do. They do. It has no basis, but they have a basis, don't they? So I want to start real quick and just hit a few key points that were things for me to look at. And first off, man, I had to look into where did we come from? I mean, how did we get here? And of course, we all know that that's evolution. Now, it's taught in a lot of schools as fact. I have no problem with evolution being taught. I really don't. As long as, to me, there's a flip side and say, okay, let's give the other side too. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
yeah.
Let's give the creation side and let's give the evidence for both. And so that was a struggle for me because I was taught evolution all my life. And of course, as I grew as a Christian, I saw, wait a minute, we got a conflict here. And we've got to look at that. And I'll never forget in seminary one time, my philosophy professor was the one that kind of got me on to some of this apologetics, going even deeper with it, Jonathan. And he was on TV and had a debate with the guy. And he was a well-known evolutionist, and my professor at that time was a well-known, philosopher, I guess, of religion at Southwestern Seminary, Dr. Bush. And I was watching him on TV, and it was very fascinating because the evolutionist said, well, where did God come from? And of course, the answer to that is we don't know. It's not really written down. How did God come into being? He just always was. Yeah, and that's what he said. And that was Dr. Bush's answer. And he goes, ha-ha, what are you talking about? God always was. You can't tell me where he came from? And Dr. Bush is like, no. And then Dr. Bush kind of turned it around on him and said, so where did matter come from? Where did the matter of the universe, where did rocks come from? Where did dust, where did any kind of material in the universe come from? And of course, you know what his answer was.
It always existed.
It always existed. We don't know. And Dr. Bush just looks at him and goes, don't you? And the guy just kind of sat there and went, bong. You could see the light going off, him going, oh my goodness, I just got owned,
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting for me. So I want to look real quick into some things about biology. Again, I'm not a professor, I'm not a doctor. First, I want us to start looking at the idea of biology. It's called abiogenesis. Could life have begun on planet Earth? Because the theory is the Big Bang Theory happened, and we are in this primordial soup, and life sprang out of that. I think it's interesting. I've read some guys from the past. One of them is Dr. George Wald. He was a Nobel laureate. He was a professor at Harvard for many years. He was a biologist. He was also very much an activist back in the 60s. He passed away in 1997. And here's what he said on the facts of biogenesis, in other words, life springing up out of nothing and creating what we have today in humans. He says, when it comes to the origin of life, we have only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation, and spontaneous generation is the same thing as abiogenesis. He says one is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is the supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility, he says. Spontaneous generation was scientifically disproved 100 years ago by Louis Pasteur. And he lists some other guys there. Quote, that leads us scientifically to only one possible conclusion, that life arose as a supernatural creative act of God. He said, I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in a God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible, which is the spontaneous generation arising to evolution. And that was in the Scientific American in August of 1954.
Ken, you want to know something interesting? I was listening to this Oxford graduate. He's a Christian.
Uh-huh.
He goes around giving like lectures on these topics, and he's written several books.
Uh-huh.
He tells you, he goes through like basically the history of science and how it began with Christianity as a basis.
It did.
And how many of the scientists a few hundred years ago, they wanted to go away from some of the more classical theories of science because many of them just thought that things spontaneously generated from this earth. And one of the reasons that I guess even Darwin attempted to do what he did, or one of the reasons that science arose the way it did, is because we were trying to get away from spontaneous generation. We began to think, well, surely things didn't simply just appear. And that was one of the bases historically for science. And now, all we have to say today in 2022 as a response to God is that, well, it just spontaneously appeared.
Yeah. And
So
you
we're
know,
running circles.
what he's talking about with Louis Pasteur, if you don't already know, you've heard of the pasteurization process. What they used to believe is if they left something out, like maybe they left some water out or something like that, some life would begin to appear. But then Louis Pasteur, what he did was I believe he boiled the water and he got all the germs, killed everything, and he sealed it off in a vacuum-like environment, and he left it, showing that no, that the life appeared in that water before because there was biological material already in it. There was stuff that could grow already out that we didn't know about, like bacteria and different things like that. But once you kill that bacteria and there's nothing in there whatsoever of any kind of life, that it can't start up. And so that was the Pasteur process. You know, I also wanted to check with some other things, Jonathan. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar. I'm kind of infatuated with this right now. It's called ChatGPT. It came on about a year and a half ago now. It's been in the works for a lot longer than that, but it's come out. It's an AI. And so it is this supercomputer. If you don't know what AI is, it's artificial intelligence. You know, you've seen it coming in the movies, and it's been coming. And so you can now go online to ChatGPT and you can ask it questions. I mean, the universities are kind of flipping out over it right now because you can say, write me a paper on my son did this. Now, he didn't turn it in, professors. He did not turn it in. But he said, I just wanted to test it out. So he said, I want to write a paper on such and such. And it wrote a 2.5-page paper for him on that. And he said, it was actually pretty good. It wasn't bad. And so here's what I asked ChatGPT, this AI. I said, what are the odds that life could begin on planet Earth. And it said this: the odds of life beginning on planet Earth are impossible to calculate, as they depend on too many variables. So I did a second try. I said, okay, I worded it a little bit different. And I said, what are the odds? And it said, the odds that life begin on planet Earth are impossible to calculate accurately, as the exact conditions and circumstances that allowed for the origin of life are unknown. However, the general consensus among scientists is that the odds of life originating on Earth are extremely high due to many conditions that are thought to have contributed to the emergence of life. There was a Dr. Stanley Miller back in the 1950s that he took some, I believe it was some water, and he added some electrical current to it, and they found out that there was some amino acids created. But that is where it ended. I mean, even I read one doctor who said that even proved more, because the negative and positiveness of the amino acids made it to where life couldn't really begin based on that. It wasn't the right conditions. So right now, we don't know of any kind of experiments that really can show us that life began on planet Earth. Now, some would say we just haven't had enough variables, enough chances, and that with the trillions of chances that probably were available on primordial Earth, that one chance could have taken. One person that I did see and I have seen in the past is that the odds are 1 in 10 to the 80th power. That's 1 with a 10 with 80 zeros behind it, which to me is like incredibly impossible. There's other professors that said that. One professor said we might have to wait 100 million years for it to fall into place just in a test tube. So whereas on this planet, on a planetary scale, you've got 1 trillion test tubes, probably even more than that. It's conceivable that using this equation, playing these games, is hinting at a possible explanation for why we haven't seen life appearing in our laboratories. In other words, you don't have enough experiments going on for it to actually happen. I've heard other professors say different things, like Dr. Fred Hoyle said this, and I'll put some of these links in so you can read them for yourself. An honest man, armed with the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to almost be a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to happen to satisfy to get it going. Also, Dr. Hoyle said biochemical systems are exceedingly complex, so much so that the chance of their being formed through random shuffling of simple organic molecules is exceedingly minute. Now, grant you, this is an atheistic guy. He's not a Christian, and so he's saying this. It would be minute to a point where there is no different from zero. In other words, there's zero chance of it happening. For life to originated on Earth, it would be necessary that quite explicit instructions should have been provided for its assembly.
Yeah.
I call those instructions God.
Yeah.
In other words, he designed it, didn't he?
Right.
He put it in there. So basically, I read some other guys, even one person said that alien life, now we're not talking about Star Wars, and we're not talking about Star Trek, we're talking about some form of alien life they believe may have come through outer space, got on Earth, seeded the Earth, and then it took off from there. I don't believe that.
That requires more faith for me, Ken.
Yeah. That requires more faith. And guys, if you think about it, in your reading, look at the complexity. Just look at the complexity of the human eye or the human brain. I mean, the complexity there is just incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I've heard one guy say that it's the odds of life beginning on planet Earth are like the odds of an explosion in a junkyard creating a BMW.
Oh, I've heard a 747.
747, yeah. So you think about well, that's impossible. But yet people don't think about, but you're saying that an eye was created on its own, by itself, with no intricate, with all the intricacies that it takes? It's insane. And you think about the brain, what it took there. To me, to even comprehend that is crazy.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to go there.
One guy I like a lot is James Tour. He's a synthetic organic chemist and a nanotechnologist who became a believer. And he'll tell you, what I like about him is he'll call anybody out on their bluff. Because he's one of the leading guys. He writes in a lot of journals. Any atheist or Christian scientist will tell you and give him his credit because he's just like that, you know, kind of high on that pedestal in his area. And he'll tell you it is impossible to get to spontaneously combust any kind of life arising out of anything. He likened it to basically taking your Thanksgiving turkey, right, nice and carved on your table, throwing it in a petri dish with some bones and a little bit of blood and some electricity, like you mentioned, and a few enzymes and other chemicals, and trying to create a turkey. Essentially, like, there's a lot of big words and jargon, but if you could compare it, like, that's exactly what scientists are trying to do in labs right now.
Yeah,
And he's
yeah.
telling you it's sheer impossibility.
Yeah, you'd starve to death waiting for that turkey to get there, wouldn't you? Like, I'm hungry, man. Let's get this turkey going, you know?
Yeah.
But you're right. That's a great example. And so when we look at biology, guys, we're no biologists, but you know what? We can read. And here's what I want you to know. Don't be afraid to talk to people. One of the apologists we had come to our church back in Texas, he was a biology teacher, and somebody started challenging him on some of these quotes. And a guy came and he brought quotes from well-known atheistic biologists, and this guy said, that can't be true. And so he didn't want to take that guy's word for it that was saying this. He went and looked up first primary resources to look at these quotes, and he found out that they were right. And so that made him start looking into it. And he became a believer after saying, you know what, I've been teaching evolution for years. But as I look deeper into it, we have nothing. And what most evolutionists look for is they're still waiting for that. They're still waiting for that to happen. And so,
You're waiting a long time.
You'll be waiting a long time. So I just want you to know that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay not to be an expert. It's okay to say, let's look into it. Let's dig deep. There's resources out there. Guys, with the internet today, you have no reason not to begin to look at it. But Jonathan, leaving from there, let's go into another idea. We've looked at biology. We've kind of looked at evolution, but I want to continue on this evolution look. And one of the areas we can also look at to say, does God exist? Did he create the world? Is the fossil record.
Right.
Y'all have heard of the missing link. The missing link is the idea that there's a transition from, let's take man, for example, from ape to man. And to this day, they have not found the missing link. Now, to me, it seems like you would have millions of them. Because you would go ape, and then you would jump to man, and of course there has to be a man and woman to create baby missing links. And there would have to be this transition, right? And there should be millions of them. I know years ago they thought they had one in Lucy. That's what I grew up with. I mean, that was probably discovered, I forgot how long ago, And they came back and said, no, it's basically a human. It's not. And they haven't really found the missing link. I went to my friend, the expert, ChatGPT again, and I asked him, Jonathan, I said, what about missing link? And it said this: the term missing link refers to the hypothetical, mind you, evolutionary link between two species of organisms, which is believed to explain their common ancestry. In the context of human evolution, the term is often used to describe the fossil evidence that would demonstrate a clear connection between modern humans and our ancestral species. To date, no single fossil has been found that conclusively demonstrates this evolutionary link. And in the field of human evolution, it's still an active area of research and discovery. However, the accumulation of fossil evidence and DNA analysis has provided a robust and increasingly detailed picture of human evolution and has allowed scientists to conduct comprehensive understanding of our evolutionary history and relationships with other species. It didn't say the missing link had been found.
Correct.
It's saying that. Now, let me differentiate here. There's also the idea of evolution within a species. That happens. But we're talking about it jumps a species. So all of a sudden, ape becomes man, or fish becomes
Tiger.
Walking fish.
Right.
But within our species, I can have a kid that's 6'5", and I'm 5'10", and my wife is 5'2". That's evolution within a species. Evolution within a species. You can have two parents that have totally dark hair, and a kid comes out with, red hair.
Yeah. Or like this, for example, you have a wolf, and on throughout time,
Yeah.
that wolf could eventually become a poodle.
You can mate with a dog or something like
Right.
that. Yeah, and they
Right.
can have hybrids, but that's within the species.
Right.
That's within the species. You don't have a wolf mating with a horse. You know, you don't have certain animals mating with certain other animals. You can have a mule, of course,
Right.
which is a hybrid species, but that's within a full species. So the same with humans. Different people with different skin colors, different heights, different hair. Yeah, they can mate and they're within a species, but we're still all human.
That's right.
And we create different looking humans, by doing that. And so that is what we want to differentiate. Is to date there is not, and also another thing that's interesting about the fossil record is that within the fossil record there's no life, no life, no life, and all of a sudden there's life. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Not to mention, so they don't necessarily see like gaps of like millions of years between different kinds of life that they're saying like, oh, this was from this many millions of years ago. This was from this many thousands of years ago. They're all on the same strata. They're all in the same fossil record. They're finding them side by side.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, exactly. So an amoeba is right next to saber-tooth tiger or something like that.
Right.
It's interesting, Jonathan. Of course, being from Texas, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and about an hour away out western
That's
of
right.
Texas is the town of Glen Rose. Actually, my sister lives in Glen Rose now, and they have a place out there called Dinosaur State Park. And man, from the time I was growing up all the way through high school, and even when we would go back to visit my parents, we would go down there and go hiking because there's hills, but there's also the Paluxy River. And in the Paluxy River, they have a place called the Dinosaur State Park. And right next to the Dinosaur State Park, as you come in, there's the Creation Research Museum right there on the right before as you come into the park. And it's fascinating because you can go into Dinosaur State Park and you can walk among actual dinosaur footprints. It's kind of cool. And when the river's not flowing, when it's a dry season like it was back, I think it was about a year ago in August when I went, it was pretty dry. It was dried up and the footprints are well seen. When the river's flowing a little bit more, it's kind of a rock bed river. And so you can still walk around that river. It doesn't flow real big, and you can see the footprints. Well, it's interesting. One year we went back with the kids, and we went to the Creation Research Museum there. And back then it was just a little bitty trailer. But Dr. Carl Ball was there, and it was very fascinating to talk to him. And he said, we have what we believe to be footprints, human footprints that were in the strata at the same time as the dinosaur. Now, I looked it up again this time just to say, is this really true? And there is some controversy about that. Some are saying no, they're way too big. They're way too big of footprints. But they have what they call an explanation for that because a lot of things are big. They have fossils of ferns that are gigantic.
Yeah.
They have saber-toothed tigers that are gigantic. Of course, they had dinosaurs that were gigantic.
Yeah.
So they have a theory, or it's maybe more of a hypothesis. But I think it sounds pretty good. I'll let you research that for yourselves. And it's about the atmosphere of the Earth, oxygen, and different things like that, how things got to be big because it takes a lot of oxygen to grow something that big. It takes a lot of a density of oxygen for a dinosaur to even survive, is my understanding. So I'm not a scientist, but those are just some things that made me think when I was going through some of my journeys to say, does God exist? Is evolution true? And all that kind of stuff. You know what, Jonathan? I think we're going to stop right there. And here's what we're going to do. We'll come back next time and talk about a little bit more, but we're going to have some links in the bottom, and we're going to encourage you to look at this stuff. Once again, I want to encourage you and say that don't be afraid to talk to atheists and agnostics, and I'll even say practical atheists that may be Christians that say evolution's it's a foregone conclusion. It's a fact. I even read some people that when you questioned about whether whether evolution is true or not, they presuppose it's true, and there's no question about it.
Right.
And the quotes were amazing. They can say, yes, evolution's true because it's a fact. And these are doctors, and I'm going, well, could you show me the facts? And they couldn't. It's just, It's a circular reason that says evolution's true because we've already proven it to be true. Well, that's just circular reasoning. Let's look at the facts. So we'll come back next time and we'll hit on some more things about atheism, agnosticism, a non-belief in God, and how we need to understand that to be able to talk to people. Thank you. We're glad you're here.